So welcome back, everybody. We continue today in the halacha in the chapter 35, which I believe today is the fifth class in this chapter, as it being a fundamental chapter. I know, perhaps in the previous weeks we took a bit maybe more time to review the class of the previous week, just to get into it. But I felt in order just to move on, on the outset, I would just say that suggest everybody to just to get the flow for those newcomers. If you suggest to go back to the previous class, you could see it again in the very link box. Just type in Tanya, or as we mentioned quite a few times, always worthwhile to know to this website, again hosted by koshertube.com, which is the Tanya Online, tanyaonline.com. Again, the advantage, it's the same classes, but the advantage of the quick access to the previous classes, as well to follow, the ability to follow with the text, the class with its text. So we're holding the Inkain, or Ve'ein Eir Hashem Sheirel Mizgalabay El Edekim. It's basically, again, a bit of a recap. We have to, or I can't. That's the way I feel that it's important that some introductory words into this class. So we're going to try to make it brief, not to take much time. So the Alter Rebbe again spoke about the oil, which the Yenuka mentions based on the pasuk which says Chacham Einav Bereshe, the wise has his eyes on his head. So he says, who is the one on his head? The Shechina, which is Shari al Reshe, which is the fire which dwells on the head of the Yid. And just like any fire, in order to maintain the continuous burn, the continuous residing the flame on a wick, is only when there's adequate oil. Is constantly oil. The oil finishes, one puts more oil and so on, adds oil in order to make sure that wick is never extinguished. So too, he says, Shlomo Melech Tzavach, Shlomo Melech screams V'shemen al reishcha al yechsar, that you should never be missing any oil on your head. And what is it? He says V'inun uvdon tovon mitzvahs, basically learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. And with this, the Torah mitzvahs becomes the oil which maintains the burning of the Shechina, the Eir Hashem, the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, on the reish, on the head of every Yid. And the Alter Rebbe pointed out, what is it? Why is the oil need to be? Why does Torah mitzvah need to be oil? What is insufficient of the neshama, which we know is a chelik l'kamimal? It's part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it has similar to the substance, right, of Torah mitzvahs. Like I said, oil has this something special of the substance of the oil, as it identifies with fire more than any other liquid. So to Torah mitzvahs in this context, because again, it's Hashem Elokecha Ish Eichel, the Hashem is fire, and Torah mitzvahs you have the elokus, the energy of elokus, the energy of God in every mitzvah, is evodim Hashem's limbs and so on. So that becomes the oil, the substance which maintains the hashras, the dwelling of the Shekhinah on a continuous basis. Again, as the Yid continues to learn Torah and do mitzvahs, so the question is, isn't the neshama also a chelik of the it's also the whole substance, the whole makeup of the neshama? It's a part of God. So why is that not good enough to be used as oil? Again, just read the tidbits of the previous classes. Again, to get into this class, so the Alter, or even the expression of the neshama, which because the neshama is a chelik l'kamimal, like Alter Rebbe elaborates in the third chapter, because it's a part of God, so therefore it has a genuine love to Hashem, fear to Hashem. So all these expressions of love and fear, which all these neshama expressions, again as a result being the neshama part of God, why shouldn't that be the oil which would keep the wick burning? In other words, the psila, which is the gufa adam, the body of man, having the shechina on a constant basis, al reishe, on top of him. Why do you need the Torah mitzvahs, the tefillin, the mezuzah, and so on and so forth? So the Alter Rebbe says, in the end of the day, the shechina is there when it's all about shechina, meaning to say that ultimately when a person demonstrates his love to Hashem, there's some subtle eye involved. Again, not chas v'shalom for any he has avos Hashem for any ulterior motives. That's not a true, genuine avos Hashem, love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the mere expression of love and fear, namely love, as we pointed out last week, namely love, is about I love, and any I in the most subtle level, most delicate and subtle level, it doesn't click with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, just like on the grander picture, as the Gemara says in Satan and Evil Yuchelim Lodar, Hashem says, when there's ego, when there's I, when there's self-centeredness, I cannot stand there, I cannot be there. It's a place that I turn away from. So even when you're dealing, bring that in, shrink that in, even to the most smallest, minute expression of I, which is ultimately the expression of the neshama. Even again, it's a genuine fear, it's a genuine love. And say this a time and again, chas v'shalom, there's no real I involved when a person loves HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but the expression of a feeling, of an attribute of love, there is I love, I fear, but namely I love, and therefore that little I doesn't connect, that cannot be the oil which should allow the Shekhinah to be able to feel comfortable. It's precisely the mitzvah, which is not about me at all. It's about God, one solely about God, maybe the Torah or the mitzvahs, and so on, as he explained. The definition of a mitzvah. The mitzvah is ultimately the presence of Hashem. It's ultimately God Himself without nothing of myself mixed in. I submit myself. The mitzvah is Eiver Demal Hashem's limb. Torah is Anechi Hashem Alekecha. Torah is God, and therefore, when I fulfill a mitzvah, it is complete submission of myself into the aid of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore, precisely Torah mitzvahs becomes the oil which allows the aid of Shekhinah, the light of the Shekhinah, to reside over man. So again, I'm saying it very brief, worthwhile to see a little bit barichus and a little bit length and elaboration in the previous classes. And Alter Rebbe goes on again. We're holding in page 88, which is about halfway through, more about two-thirds through the chapter. So we're holding the Einei Hashem Shedim Mizgali the Kima Mitzvahs. As such, this was the culmination that the last week's the ending of the last week's class, that the Eid Hashem does not dwell and is not revealed within the Yid, is not manifest within the Yid, only through the fulfillment of mitzvahs. This is Hashem's desire, Hashem's wisdom. Belishum has to put him without any concealment. So the Rebbe goes on now, and he says, now that we established that it's about only Torah mitzvahs, is the oil again which maintains that Eid Shechina, the light of the Shechina, in order to constantly dwell over man. So now the Rebbe is going to say the difference of Torah mitzvah. The Torah's accomplishment, and the accomplishment comes through Torah, and then the accomplishment comes through mitzvahs. In other words, in the end of the day, they're two separate accomplishments. So first of all, it has a broader bracket of the difference of Torah mitzvahs. We say Talmud Torah Keneged Chol. There's a number of reasons when the Alter Rebbe himself, in chapter 5, 23, 37, points out the virtue of Torah over mitzvahs even, because in the end of the day, they're two separate connections. The union which comes through Torah, in a sense, from a certain perspective and point of view, is even a greater union that comes through mitzvahs, even though the ultimate objective of the neshama coming down here into this world is to do a mitzvah which you cannot do in Gan Eden as opposed to learning Torah. Nesifta derakiyas, it says a number of times in the statements of our sages of blessed memory, maybe in Gemara or Medrash and similar. And there's a yeshiva in Gan Eden. The notion of Torah exists in the high realm and levels, as opposed to mitzvahs. So this is the ultimate objective of the neshama coming down to this world. It cannot put on tefillin in Gan Eden, and it cannot put on mezuzah in Gan Eden, and it comes down precisely in this world and invests in a body, and only then it could perform a mitzvah. So there's the virtue of Torah of mitzvahs, and then mitzvahs being the ultimate objective, which again the Alter Rebbe discusses in these various chapters. But here the Alter Rebbe remains within this context. What is the Torah do in order that the Yid should be able to maintain that light, that fire of the Shekhinah over him? So he says man is generally comprised, in other words, man's expression. So he says again, what's the accomplishment? How Torah is the oil, becomes the oil, and as mitzvahs are as well oil which allows the Eid Hashem to continuously burn over man. So he says that so basically the man's expression is comprised of three: machshava, dibur, ma'aseh, thought, speech, and action. So the Alter Rebbe is going to explain that Torah oils his thought and speech, while mitzvahs oil his action, or mitzvahs are the oil the way it's expressed by action, and Torah is the oil the way it's expressed by through thought and speech. So this is where the Alter Rebbe focuses on in these coming words. V'hine kisha adam is coming part of the Pedic, meaning Kishadam, Asik B'Teda, when man occupied himself in learning Teda, Zai, Nishmose, his Neshama, Shinaf Shelikis, his godly, his Neshama, which is his godly soul, Shnei Levusha Pinimim Levadam, with their inner garments, solely with their inner garments. Again, if you compare thought, speech, and action, so obviously when what would be considered an inner garment, thought is obviously an inner garment, because thought is the way the person expresses himself within. Even speech is an inner garment, because speech is the important koach which man has, the unique talent, the unique ability to express himself or herself, attributed to man. So it's something, it's a gift associated with the human being. It's a koach pnimi, again, not in comparison to machshava, to thought, because speech is a step lower, because it's the way the person expresses himself to another party out of himself, as opposed to a thought is the way the thought is the way the person is for himself by himself. Yet in comparison to action, machshava and dibur are koachas pnimim, because action is a total external koach. It's not even associated with the human being, human race, for that matter. Even an animal has maisa, it could push, it could pull, and so on and so forth. Maisa is a total external expression, as opposed to dibur. Dibur carries a lot of the nefesh, the famous nafshe yotze bedabri. A person could bring his nefesh, his soul, his inner heart and inner soul in words, because words have a shaychus to the pnimius, to the most deep, to the more inward dimension of man, as opposed to maisa. Action is total external expression. So when a person learns Torah, so then his neshama, which is his godly soul, with the two koachas, the two garments, inner garments, which is koach hadibur machshava, the koach of speech and thought. Solely the koach of speech and thought, nichlolos, are included by Hashem in Baruch Hu, in the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, umichadis by biyichud gomer, and unite with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the ultimate unity. And this draws the dwelling of the Shekhinah of divine presence over his godly soul, because again his godly soul is expressing itself, is oiling, it's oiling the system through his learning Torah, and the Torah itself. In order one to learn Torah appropriately, and even halachically, it's important to verbalize the words of Torah. So what does a person invest? He invests his thought in his speech. The thought and his speech is of his godly soul, the way it expresses itself through his guf, through his body. It's his physical mind thinking. It's his physical instruments of his mouth. In other words, his hey moitze sapeh, which is again talking, verbalizing the words of Torah. So then, at that point, the godliness, the Ein Sof, it feels very. In other words, the koach of dibur, the speech and thought of the neshama, the speech and thought of the neshama, is right now consumed and included in the light, in the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, blessed be He, and not only included, but completely becomes one with the ultimate unity. At that point, that allows the Shekhinah to hashoreh, to dwell upon man. As like the Razal tells us, like the Razal tells us that even someone who sits and learns Torah, Shekhinah, the divine presence is with him. Because again, he's learning Torah. What he's doing is he's expressing, he's allowing his machshava v'dibur, his thought and his speech of his godly soul, the way it comes through his body. He is again a physical person sitting and learning Torah, so he is completely oiling his inner dimensions, his inner garments, which again allows the Shekhinah to dwell. Afilu echad yeshes b'Torah. Someone who sits and learns Torah is Shekhinah imei, his the divine presence is together with him. However, in order to draw the light and the ha'ara of the Shekhinah, which means the ray, the light of the Shekhinah, also on his physical body, on his animal soul, which this is the soul which vitalizes the body, like we said in a number of places from the beginning, from the first chapter in Tanya, one nefesh, and the nefesh, even not dealing with the nefesh alikis, in other words, the soul which vitalizes the body enters into the blood, and ultimately becomes the conduit, the blood becomes the conduit through which the nefesh, the soul rather, not the godly soul, the soul which vitalizes the body, comes through and ultimately gives life and existence and function to the entire body. And as we said, the Alter Rebbe says that's the nefesh bahamis, that's the animal soul. As we said, it's not again we mentioned time and again the precise expression of the Alter Rebbe choice of definition. It's his animal soul because from that perspective, that's where man inclines to the bodily, to the animalistic, in every character which the animal has. Man attains that, man has that, but again, not necessarily because of anything bad. It's just this is the nefesh chayunis. It makes it a living person before the hizgabra surah al before the domination of form over matter, meaning to say over the teiv, the quality of good, of refinement, the quality of godly choice, which is associated with the godly soul, over the animal soul, over the nature of man. This is the way. This is the stat. This is the before that. Prior to that, the nefesh itself, the nefesh chayunis, is the nefesh bahamis, is the animal soul, which is again, you're looking at the person from the perspective of only body. He's inclined to the bodily, to even the animalistic. So in order to draw the light of the Shekhinah also on his body, on his animal soul, which is invested in his body, that mamash, in other words, mamash, to draw the Shekhinah to this lower level, of complete lower floor, lower story, lower realm, which is not only the expression of the godly soul, the way it's associated with learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. In other words, Alter Rebbe says when you learn Torah, learning Torah is in comparison to learning Torah. So Alter Rebbe again points out when a person learns Torah, you don't see the effect, you don't see the accomplishment, you don't see the impact or the godly light drawing itself onto the inferior levels of man, into where his body is or where the animal soul is, because it remains in the more lofty, supreme, superior kaiches, which is more an expression of his godly soul, because it's a godly experience. You don't see that the person is involving his animal soul, certainly not as much, certainly not as well, not his body, as opposed to the person puts on tefillin, it's on his physical hand, and other mitzvahs which are associated with the physical, doing even separating Trum and Meisters, putting up mezuzah, it's man's physical involvement. Torah is not so much man's physical involvement, even though from the perspective of his of a verb from dibur, the speech, the involvement of speech in his learning Torah, there is to some degree, it says akimas fasav havimais, moving your lips, to the extent that there is action as well. So it has an effect in some action in some inferior dimension of man when a person learns Torah. But yet you can't have a comparison to the involvement of a person doing mitzvahs, with then even the inferior parts of him are involved in the mitzvah. The actual whole koyach ha'maisa, which is associated with his guf, the koyach of action, primarily associated with his body and his animal soul, are involved in the mitzvah. And in order to draw the Shekhinah there, because again, you don't want to leave any part of the person's body, like you don't want to have a fragmented flame because it doesn't have oil from every angle of the wick. It shows have only oil in one part of the wick and not the entire part of the wick full of the oil, because that's the only way that there will be a nice, beautiful burning flame. If there's compromise, if the oil, the placement of the oil in the wick is compromised, so then you don't have a nice burning flame. And in this case as well, because the whole point is to draw the Eira Shechina throughout the entire body, the entire mitzvahs of the person. So therefore, this is where mitzvahs comes in. And that's what he says, you have to one has to be Mekai mitzvahs maisi, is the physical actions, and not like the aguf mamish, which are accomplished through the body itself. The energy of the body, which is invested in this action, is then it becomes completely consumed in the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And again, as well, similar to the experience of learning Torah, when the godly soul is completely, uses the same expression, miyuchad bay, is completely one, but yichud gomer, with the ultimate oneness with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Or again, when it comes to learning Torah by the Nefesh Elikis, Alter Rebbe uses the same expression, that then even the body, which is the energy which is invested in this action, which is a bodily energy, also becomes completely consumed in the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and in the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And again, uses the same expression. There's no an absolute expression that it becomes one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, b'yichud gomer, with an absolute complete oneness. And this is the third garment of the nefesh halikis, of the godly soul. So it's the godly soul expressing itself through the animal soul, through the body. Right? We shouldn't get confused that it's a godly soul, animal soul, because in the end of the day, it's a godly decision to do a mitzvah. So it's the godly soul which is coming through the action, which is, again, this is the garment of action, which is the garment of the godly soul, but the way it deals with, or the way it includes in the process, the body and the animal soul, because it's only the animal soul which vitalizes the body. So if you're putting on tefillin with your hand stretched out, you take one hand, you put on that tefillin, so it's a godly decision coming through the maisa, the levush hashlishi, the third garment of the nefesh halikis, of the godly soul, which wants to do that action, but yet, who does it pull into? Who does it involve? It involves the goof, the body, and consequently involves the nefesh bahamis, the animal soul, which is vitalizing in that very moment when he performs the mitzvah. It's vitalizing that hand which the tefillin is placed on, and including the hand, which is, for example, wrapping the mitzvah as the straps around the head. So it all becomes part of that godly experience. V'nichlal bi kedusha mamosh. At that point, the whole energy, the vitalizing energy which exists and vitalizes his body. Again, this is the nefesh bahamis, the animal soul which comes from klipas nega, from that neutral klipa, is completely transformed from evil to good. It becomes completely consumed at the moment of practice of that mitzvah into this sanctity and the holiness, exactly like in the nefesh halikis, like the godly soul. Because this, the animal soul, the body, is the one which is physically executing that mitzvah. Without the animal soul, without the physical body and the animal soul involved in this mitzvah, the godly soul, with all its greatest and noble decision, greatest and noble and type of noble decision, would never be able to accomplish in the body, because he ruchnis, because the godly soul is spiritual, and the body is physical and mundane, and therefore what combines the two is the memutza beineim, the intermediary between them, is nefesh chayunas habahamis, is this very soul which gives life to the physical body, which again, that's the animal soul, which is invested in the first physical step which exists within the body of man, which is the blood, like we said before. That's the introductory, that's where it enters in order to circulate the energy into every part of the body. It goes through the blood. The blood is the substance which is susceptible to the nefesh, to this soul, to the animal soul, to the soul which is called, again, the nefesh chayunis habahamis, to the animal soul, or the vitalizing soul, again it's the same, which is invested in the physicality of man. That's why it's an intermediary. It's in one hand, it itself is not physical, it is a soul, but it's intermediary between the godly soul, which is holy, and the physicality of man, starting from the blood of man, which exists within the person's heart, b'chol haguf, in the entire body. So that ultimately again becomes the intermediary. In one hand, it's not physical, so it's connected to the godly soul, though it's not holy. If you remember, we mentioned, as Beis Latarav explained in chapter 6, the nefesh bahamis doesn't belong to the sholosh klipas atmeis, to the lower level, the inferior and lower level of klipa, which has no aliyah. We cannot be ma'ila, we cannot elevate it. It comes from klipas, rather from klipas nega. Chapter 7, which again you can invite it to look in there a little more in detail. The Rebbe describes this nefesh bahamis because it has the klipas nega, which is called the neutral klipa, that if you don't elevate it, it falls into the lower level of sholosh klipas atmeis, but you have the ability to elevate it. It can become kedusha mamash, it become mamash holy. The notion of neutrality can go both ways, regress and progress, or digress and progress. And this is where the nefesh bahamis, the animal soul, being that this becomes the conduit, or through the connection, that connecting force between the godly soul and the body. And therefore, when the person performs a mitzvah, so the whole animal soul, which is the one who's involved in this mitzvah. Again, because at that point the person puts on tefillin, as an example, if one lights the Shabbos candles or one puts on tefillin, and then any action and any mitzvah, which is a ma'aseh, which is associated with action, so because at that point the God, this nefesh, the natural nefesh, which is called nefesh chayunis abahamis, the animal soul, the soul which vitalizes the body, is right now giving chayus to the body. Now, what is the person occupied in doing a mitzvah? So the physical limb which is doing the mitzvah, which is the body, together with the energy which is vitalizing that physical limb, let's say in the example which we're giving of tefillin, is right now completely transformed because it's involved in the mitzvah at the time, and the energy is vitalizing that hand which is putting on tefillin. It's vitalizing the hand which is the hand which is putting the straps around the opposite hand, and therefore the entire experience, the physical body is right now being part and consumed. Again, we say something neutral. It becomes right now elevated to the kedusha, to the holiness, to the sanctity of the nefesh elikis, to the godly soul, which is again a chelik of the kamimal, which is a part of God. and he says more so mamish. It becomes mamish like that godly soul, which is completely on the outset godly, but in the time of the performance of the mitzvah, not only godly soul, because of its decision to go ahead and do the mitzvah, to express itself by doing the mitzvah, but the animal soul as well, together with the body which is vitalizing at the time of the person does mitzvah, is completely consumed as it stands in submission to the decision of the nefesh elikis, again in this context of putting on tefillin. So it completely ascends to the holiness of the nefesh elikis, to the absolute holiness of the nefesh elikis, and becomes completely one with the Arieh Hashem, with the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Have a wonderful evening.